This is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the program. Our top stories: the United States Coast Guard widens its search area for a tourist submarine which went missing en route to explore the Titanic. Our other headlines: a top-level summit between China and Germany begins in Berlin, with trade, climate change and Ukraine high on the agenda. 9 men make a second appearance at a court in Greece accused of masterminding last week's fatal migrant boat crossing. And succeed with a siesta, why taking a daytime nap could be good for your brain. A major international search and rescue operation is underway to find a submarine which has gone missing en route to explore the wreck of the Titanic off Newfoundland in Canada. The United States Coast Guard says the search area has now been expanded into deeper waters for the Titan, which was carrying tourists to the wreck. It lost contact about an hour and 45 minutes into the dive on Sunday. This submersible has a 96-hour oxygen supply, which the experts estimate now gives the 5 passengers on board 2 days of life support left. CGTN's correspondent Mark Webster has the story.
What is making this rescue even more difficult is that once the submersible is underwater, it has no means of communicating with the surface. The dive would normally take up to 8 hours, including the long descent and resurfacing, plus time circling the ship's remains, which lie nearly 4,000 metres below the Atlantic Ocean. Rescuers have deployed aircraft and search vessels using underwater sonar equipment in their efforts to find the submersible. But the wreck is nearly 1,500 kilometres off Cape Cod on the US coast, and those coordinating rescue attempts say it's an extremely difficult environment.
It is a remote area, and it is a challenge to conduct a search in that remote area. But we are deploying all available assets to make sure that we can locate the craft and rescue the people on board.
The 5 who are in the vessel include a Pakistani businessman and his son, a British billionaire, a French explorer, and the CEO of the company operating the trips, Stockton Rush. Tickets for the 8-day expedition to see the Titanic on the seabed cost $250,000 each. Rush has warned would-be travellers in the past that there would be no guarantee they would get to see the ship, and that it was a dangerous environment. Those who have made the journey say the dangers are well known.
Deep submersible diving is very dangerous, but it's high tech, and as each year goes by, the equipment gets better, the technology gets better, and so on. So I'm very hopeful and very positive. I was in the sub for 12 hours. We have our own breathing system on board.
The Titanic has exercised a fascination for marine experts and the general public ever since it set sail on its maiden voyage to New York in 1912. After it hit an iceberg on that trip, the supposedly unsinkable ship broke in two as it sank to the bottom. Of the 2,200 passengers and crew on board, more than 1,500 died. The wreck was relocated in 1985, having lain undisturbed for 73 years. But experts say, such is the power of the Titanic story, that adventurers and the merely curious can't leave it alone, whatever the dangers. Mark Webster, CGTN.
Alistair Greig is Professor of Marine Engineering at University College London. Alistair, just help us here. What do we know about the Titan sub and the voyage it was on?
That it was on a trip down to visit the Titanic, and that communications were lost when it was about 2/3 of the way down. And since then, people have been searching for it.
And what about the vessel itself? I mean, is this a well-known piece of equipment? Are there many of them? Is it a prototype? What more do we know?
This, I think, was uniquely built for this purpose, but I'm not particularly familiar with this submersible.
Is it possible for the sub to have resurfaced somewhere else and that it is not deep in the ocean somewhere?
That's quite possible. That's one of the challenges, is that the researchers are looking in two places. They're looking on the seabed and also on the Atlantic surface. It has a very robust way of releasing weights to come up under its own buoyancy, so it doesn't require power to come back up to the surface, and that's the normal way of coming up. But if it's lost communication, it'll be on the surface, very difficult to see, because as it is a submersible, it's neutral point, which means it floats just at the surface. Most of it's below the surface, just a small amount will be above the surface. It's not like a boat that sits on the surface. And it's about the size of a transit van, 6-7 meters long. So spotting it from the air will be quite a challenge.
You see, that'll be rather difficult to understand for those of us who are non-engineers and non-scientists, because you kind of think the world is easily mappable. We've all got sat-nav, and we all know about the satellites and radar and the rest of it. The US Coast Guard now says this area is going to be widened. Just how difficult will this rescue operation be in such a big area?
It will be very challenging, particularly if it's on the seabed. Locating it on the seabed, and it won't be a case of seeing it, it'll be a case of hearing it, as they'll be using sonar. There may well be a pinger on the submersible, or the crew will be tapping on the hull to make a noise so it can be detected. But we don't know how smooth or rough the seabed is. It could be hidden, and there's a lot of debris down there, of course, from the Titanic itself, which will confuse the picture.
And if the cavalry do come to the rescue, I mean, presumably there are other submarine vessels that are capable of getting to the deepest depths of this area.
Yes, they are, because that's how the Titanic was found in the first place. They were remote operated vehicles and manned vehicles that went down there to observe it and to film it. But they are not on site, so they will have to be transferred from wherever they are now to the location, and then deployed down to the deck, find the submersible, attach something to it probably, and then bring it up. Unfortunately, each of those stages takes time.
And as you say, time is of the essence for those passengers on board. I mean, what kind of timeline are we looking at?
Well, I think as we've heard, that they have about an emergency air supply of 70 to 90 hours. One hopes the crew are doing everything they can to maximise the duration of that by minimising their oxygen consumption.
Alistair, good to talk to you, and thank you very much indeed for explaining that. Alistair Greig, Professor of Marine Engineering at University College, London. Now, the rest of the day's news, and Ukraine says it shot down 28 out of 30 Russian drones launched on Kyiv overnight. Ukrainian forces described a massive air attack on the capital and the city of Lviv by Iranian-made drones. Air raid alerts were also sounded in the city of Zaporizhzhia. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden says the threat of Russia using nuclear weapons is real. Biden was speaking days after Russia admitted deploying tactical missiles to Belarus, which he called absolutely irresponsible. And Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, will plead guilty to 3 federal crimes. He's being charged with 2 counts of willful failure to pay income tax and 1 firearms offence. The deal with the Justice Department will likely keep the 53-year-old out of jail. The 24-year-old man has been arrested following a series of attacks on customers at 3 Chinese restaurants in Auckland, New Zealand. A man wielding an axe entered the restaurants and began attacking people at random. 4 people have been hospitalised, 1 has since been released, and 3 remain in a stable condition. The motive for these attacks is not yet known. Romanian police have charged the controversial social media influencer Andrew Tate with rape, human trafficking and forming an organised crime group to sexually exploit women. His brother Tristan and 2 female suspects are facing the same charges. The 4 who were arrested in Bucharest last year are being held under house arrest. They deny the accusations. Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz says his country opposes any form of decoupling from China. He made his remarks at a meeting with the Chinese Premier in Berlin. The leaders discussed trade, the conflict in Ukraine and climate change, something both sides agreed to deepen their cooperation on. Our correspondent Peter Oliver is watching events in Germany for us. Peter, tell us more about today's meeting.
Hi. Yeah, really the takeaway from it is it's good to talk and it's better to do it in person. Both Li Qiang, the Chinese Premier, and Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, praising the benefits of these face-to-face meetings. They talked about climate change. They talked about the business deals between the two countries. Olaf Scholz said China should use its political weight to try and bring about an end to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. If we go back to the subject of climate change, though, both leaders said that they'd agreed on a future dialogue between Beijing and Berlin in order to try and tackle that problem that faces the planet. We can hear now from Li Qiang about how the Chinese see that going forward.
The negotiation is pragmatic and efficient. We have made fruitful progress. We will jointly announce the initiative of negotiation mechanism over climate change and green transition. The two countries will also hold a new round of high-level economic and financial talks.
Well, we also heard from Li Qiang saying that China was willing to take relations with Germany to a new level. In fact, he said that they wanted to vigorously enhance the facilitation of people-to-people exchange. So more dialogue and more people coming here to Berlin from Beijing, and more people from here in Berlin going over to China as well, we can expect in the near future.
Peter, that may be the case, but of course this meeting comes at a time when Germany is calling for de-risking from China.
Yes, de-risking being called for within the walls of the Chancellery just behind me. Now, Olaf Scholz very keen to express what he meant by that. Decoupling was being talked about by some outside of the Chancellery. Olaf Scholz addressing that directly, saying there is no plans for decoupling from China, from Germany, certainly not under his watch. He said that they were looking to diversify away from certain parts of They were looking to diversify in certain ways, but certainly not to decouple in any way whatsoever. That there was no de-Sionization is what he was saying, that there were certainly no way looking to move away from China, that China remained an incredibly important partner, particularly economically for Germany. If you look, trade between Germany and China worth $320 billion last year. Germany is China's largest European-based contributor, investor of European investment, and you look at companies like BASF putting in upwards of $10 billion into their plant in Guangdong by the end of this decade. So there's certainly not going to be any decoupling, we would see, in the near future or at any time in the future, certainly from the German point of view.
Peter, thank you for that. Our correspondent Peter Oliver in Berlin. Erik Solheim is former Minister of Climate and the Environment of Norway. He told CGTN's Juliet Mann why this visit is vital for both sides.
I think this is a most important visit because it comes after connections have been somewhat broken down by COVID. It comes at exactly the same time as Secretary Blinken from the US is visiting Beijing. And of course, we have to remember that Li Qiang, the new Chinese premier, he was the party secretary of Jiangsu, he was the party secretary of Shanghai. That's worked a lot with business, but it doesn't really have, as far as I know, kind of the personal connections to Western or other international leaders. So this is a first start of a long-lasting relationship with him for Western leaders.
You talk about the business relationship, but the slogan for Tuesday is acting sustainably together. It wasn't so long ago, though, that Germany was urging China to take greater responsibility on climate and be more ambitious when it comes to things like renewables. So where do you see them working more closely together?
That is kind of diplomatic ping pong. I mean, at this point of time, China's far ahead of Germany or indeed Europe when it comes to environment technology. Look at the Shanghai Auto Fair in April. I mean, I think it came as an enormous surprise to Volkswagen and BMW and all the German brands, how far China has come on electric vehicles. 60% of all electric cars in the world are now made in China. They're far ahead of Europe. But obviously, the most important is technologically exchange. It is for the companies to work together. This cannot be done by states. But this is for Siemens and the car makers of Germany, and from LONGi, the biggest solar company in the world in China, or BYD, which is now the biggest company in the world when it comes to electric vehicles, is to form partnership between these to drive technology forward and thus improve environment standards both in Europe and in China.
Now, Li's trip comes as Germany is intensifying its efforts to de-risk from China. So how might that affect what comes out of these consultations?
Well, this started with the American slogan of decoupling between China and the West, and that is, of course, a recipe for disaster. And I think basically everyone knows that if you decouple, it will be economic downturn everywhere, and it will be also a road, unfortunately, towards conflict and, in the worst case scenario, war. De-risking is somewhat different because de-risking is not completely irrational. I mean, Chinese companies now basically fully control the value chains in critical areas like, say, electric batteries or solar panels. I mean, it's totally dominant by China. So it's not irrational for European companies to look into how it can make the value chain serve Europe better. But that's a policy which should have no anti-Chinese bias. I mean, Europe should do exactly the same versus the United States. I mean, European companies need more control over important value chains, and those de-risking can be done, but it should be done in a neutral fashion, not anti-Chinese, not anti-American, just to kind of protect European companies. And of course, it should always be done within the confines of the World Trade Organization, and with the aim that, yes, we de-risk, but the main avenue for the future is cooperation.
Erik Solheim, pleasure talking to you as always. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says China and the United States have committed to stabilize their relationship. He made his comments in London, where he's meeting the UK's Foreign Minister James Cleverly. Blinken met China's President Xi Jinping in Beijing on Monday. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the Brazilian city has developed its own digital currency designed to boost the spending power of its poorest citizens.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. The United States Coast Guard widens its search area for a tourist submarine which went missing en route to explore the Titanic. Our other headlines: a top-level summit between China and Germany begins in Berlin with trade, climate change and the war in Ukraine high on the agenda. 9 suspects accused of masterminding the failed migrant boat crossing in the Mediterranean last week have appeared in a Greek court. The death toll from the disaster has risen to 81, with hundreds of people still missing. The accused men, all Egyptian nationals, are making a second appearance before the judges in Kalamata, where they face charges including manslaughter. Let's talk to our correspondent Evangelo Sipsas in Kalamata. Evangelo, a second day in court for the accused men. What's happening today?
Well, we don't know much yet because the process hasn't ended yet. It started at 10 a.m. local time on Tuesday, and it's expected to last until 10 p.m. tonight. So far, we know that 6 of the accused have appeared in front of a judge denying any wrongdoing, and we still got 3 more to go. Of course, they had to take a 24-hour extension, as you mentioned, because more information came and surfaced to the light over the weekend, and their lawyers had to re-examine that. They came yesterday speaking to the judge and saying that their clients, the people who are accused of manslaughter and entering the country illegally, deny any wrongdoing. But as this information is coming out, we hear that more information is also regarding the Hellenic Coast Guard. We spoke to some of the lawyers as well as the Greek Ministry of Migration, and this is what they had to say. While this should be a day for celebrating and embracing those who have begun new lives, this courthouse is a sad reminder that not everyone is lucky enough to pursuing that dream.
My client says that on the boat more than 700 people were on board, and he was with another 35 Egyptians. He left his village in Egypt looking for a better life in Europe, as he was facing many financial problems.
After having been given 24 hours to prepare the response to accusations that they commanded the fishing vessel, the 9 accused are testifying on Tuesday. But questions still remain over the response from the Hellenic Coast Guard and what responsibility the authorities should shoulder for the tragedy. Reports indicate that some of those on board did reject offers of assistance and in the hope of pursuing on to Italy. But testimonies from survivors indicate that the Coast Guard appeared reluctant to act until the very last moment. From their side, the Greek Ministry of Migration is calling for more EU solidarity.
Είμαστε υποχρεωμένοι, είναι η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση υποχρεωμένη να δημιουργήσει.
We have received funds to combat this issue, but we need more solidarity. To exist, there must be a common European framework for asylum, return and integration. As long as this does not exist, we're doing what we have to do to carry out our humanitarian duty and protect our country.
As the testimonies continue alongside with the grim task of recovering the bodies, the blame game continues. What exactly happened the day that the boat sank is not yet known, but the head of the Hellenic Council for Refugees is worried that the handling of this case repeats errors of the past.
However, if I can make a first comment, unfortunately, the way we've handled it for the moment, the authorities, the Coast Guard, whom every day put something in because there was no rope, suddenly there was a rope. There was no rescue attempt, suddenly there is a rescue attempt. All this is relevant and reminds us a repeat of a very bad case in which Greece has unfortunately been recognised as responsible.
So far this year, hundreds of thousands have tried to cross to Europe via sea or land, hoping for a new life. Those who crowded onto the unstable fishing vessel in Libya will know different. And like so many others before them, those hopes have ended in the worst imaginable tragedy. And on Monday night, 3 more bodies were recovered from the sea, bringing the death toll up to 81, which allows now the Hellenic Coast Guard to extend their search and recovery operation. It's the 7th day so far, and it's going to continue to happen. Now, they haven't given us a time frame when that would end, but at least until tonight it will go through. And then, of course, they're going to sit down to have another meeting to see whether they're going to extend it or not.
Evangelo, thank you for that. Our correspondent Evangelo Sipsas in Kalamata in Greece. A small Brazilian city is hoping to tackle poverty and support businesses with its own digital currency. The city of Marica is using it to fund what is reportedly one of the largest universal basic income schemes in the world. CGTN's correspondent Lucrecia Franco reports.
Unlike some city slogans, the I Love Marica signs seem to capture the true feelings of the city's residents. That's because this coastal city, located just 60 kilometers away from Rio de Janeiro, lives off its oil revenues, the highest in Brazil. The city invests a majority in a basic income and social programs, calling it a solidarity economy. The program features the Mumbuca, a digital currency named after a small river in the town center. The currency is managed with a bank app. Residents can only spend their Mumbucas within the city limits, where one Mumbuca is worth 1 Brazilian real. It is a lifeline for many residents, like Jandira, who owns this street stand.
Quando veio o cartão Mumbuca, para mim foi uma benção.
The Mumbuca card is a blessing. It is not much, but enough to help a lot of people to survive and allows me to keep working and feeding my family.
Currently, some 40,000 residents, a quarter of the city's population, each receive about $40 in Mumbucas, available to all residents who make less than 3 times Brazil's minimum wage.
But the Mumbuca, which only exists in the form of this card, is much more than a basic income program. The city also uses its oil revenues to offer free public transportation and a zero-interest line of credit for formal and informal entrepreneurs, among other benefits.
Accepted in most of the city's commercial establishments, the Mumbucas help residents and businesses juice the economy. Maricá, a city that has been led by the left-wing Workers' Party for the last 14 years, plans to expand the program and make it sustainable for the future.
We are
looking beyond, and that's why the City Hall of Maricá created a sovereign wealth fund to push development once we shift from oil to clean energy.
The city's administration estimates it has a maximum of 20 to 30 years to pursue its socialist dream before fossil fuels are phased out. Meanwhile, the trademark red color of the Workers' Party is everywhere here in Maricá. Lucrecia Franco, CGTN, Rio de Janeiro.
Now, if you've nodded off, time to wake up for this one. Researchers at University College London say taking a regular afternoon nap is good for our brains and helps keep them bigger for longer. Scientists found those who snoozed regularly had brains 15 cubic centimetres larger than those who did not, which is equivalent to delaying aging by 3 to 6 years. The brain naturally shrinks with age, while brain health is important for protecting against dementia and diseases like Alzheimer's. The headlines again. The United States Coast Guard widens its search area for a tourist submarine which went missing en route to explore the Titanic. Our other headlines, a top-level summit between China and Germany begins in Berlin with trade, climate change and Ukraine high on the agenda. And that is The World Today. Thank you for watching. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.